Title of the talk tonight is Your Willingness to Suffer. So you may dispute the title. You're saying, well, not me, I'm not willing to. Suffering may be happening, but I'm not buying the idea that I'm willing to do that. But I'd suggest that if we haven't deeply investigated the cause of our suffering, we will continue to suffer. We may ignore what we know might be causing our suffering, or we might just refuse to poke around a little bit and see what we may not know that is causing our suffering. Either way works, right? But the suggestion that suffering is somehow our responsibility. So Nisargadatta Maharaj had a very compelling quote, and he said that the perpetuation of suffering is based on our indifference to our own suffering. The indifference to our own suffering. However, that might be framed in our mind, like, well, it's not so bad, sort of like what life is, and I shouldn't expect more, or maybe I don't deserve to feel happy or contented, or maybe God doesn't like me, or maybe this is my punishment for some past karma, or maybe I'm just not worth it, or who knows? We can come up with any kind of belief to sort of justify the continuation of our own suffering. So I'd like to just make a clarification between pain and suffering. I know many of you have heard me talk about this before, so I'll just be very brief about it. Pain in this life is frequently unavoidable. We stub our toe, it hurts. We get a disease, we don't feel well. We get aged. Things don't work like they used to. The body can experience severe pain if it's injured. There's plenty of opportunity for pain. Suffering is something else. Suffering is what we tell ourselves about the pain. In other words, the story that goes on in our head about, I don't deserve this, why me, poor me, bad things are always happening to me, whatever the storyline goes. And often what we tell ourselves about the hurt is more painful than the hurt itself. And this is especially true when we're talking about psychological hurt, right? We can feel like, well, so-and-so said something about me, and it hurt me. They shouldn't have said that, or that wasn't right. So these are conclusions in our own head about what's happening. Someone else caused my internal feelings to change by their action. And I'd suggest that that's never true. No one else has ever caused you to get hurt or to get angry. So before you ask me what planet I'm on, let me explain what I mean by that. So let's just take this, let's say, propensity to blame others. So-and-so made me do it. So-and-so made me angry. What they did was caused me to feel hurt, right? No, they just did whatever they did for whatever reason that they did it, or just out of their own unconsciousness, um, but certainly out of their own conditioning, their own perspective, their own understanding or misunderstanding. Whatever was said or whatever was done came out of their experience in this lifetime up until that moment. And whatever was said or done was a product of all of that. You have no control over that. People will say what they say, they will do what they do. Sometimes you'll like it, sometimes you won't. But you have no control over whatever another person may say or do. What you do have control over is what your reaction to that is. So let's just slow that process way down. Let's just say someone says something rude. And so they say something, you have no control over that. But what reaches your organism is just the sound waves of their voice, right? It's the eardrum, vibrates that. So far, no problem, right? Just a mechanical thing. It's like when, let's say, when I was an infant, if someone was upset because of the condition of my diaper at the moment, they might say something, some expression of annoyance, let's say. And, if they said it in a loud voice, I might be alarmed by that. They say that babies are only afraid of two things. One is loud noises, and the other is being dropped. So all the other things that we're afraid of, we've learned since then. But at that time, when we don't know the words yet, we might be frightened by a loud voice, but we don't go to the internal reaction. We don't feel guilty or shamed or remorseful, or hateful towards the person. We don't feel any of that because we don't have the framework to feel that. So all of those reactions are learned sometime later in life. So going back to our example, our eardrums are fluttering and they send a signal to our brain. So far, it's just a mechanical response. In the brain sort of reconstitutes these biochemical signals and compares them to what words that we've heard before, the meanings of them, reactions that we've become patterned by in the past. And in many ways, that reaction can be quite automatic. Someone pushes our buttons in a certain way and the reaction is there. So that's all conditioned behavior that's happening. But we can notice that it's all, that reaction is happening entirely within this organism, right? We say, well, no, the other person made me do it. No, that was just the triggering stimulation, right? But the reaction happens entirely within our own head. So, and that reaction may be so conditioned that we can't just ignore it, just stop it in its tracks. But what we can do is really investigate it, really be willing to look at that clearly, those reactions which cause us to suffer or which cause us to act in certain ways that cause other people to suffer, and really look at that underlying belief that holds that conditioning in place. And what I mean by that, there might be a belief that, people should treat each other nicely, or I don't deserve that. I'm a good person and they should like me, whatever the storyline is. But it's a belief that that justifies our reaction and holds it in place. Right? And so, what many of us do is just not look at that mechanism of the what effect that triggering stimulation has in our conditioning. We just blame it on the other person. He made me do it. You know, if she hadn't said that, I wouldn't be angry. No, no. The other person did whatever they do. Right? You made you made yourself angry by insisting that that shouldn't happen. They shouldn't be that way. It wasn't right. So here we're talking about blame. Where we're trying to export blame to the other person. The downside of that is that if we believe that, then our contentment is always in the hands of the other person. And as we hopefully all know by now, um, other people do surprising things sometimes, or sometimes things that we don't like. And so if our happiness is, if we've um, assigned our happiness to their control, then we're vulnerable, and we feel that. It's what anxiety is about. We never know what the other person might say or do. But if we can see that, the conditioned reaction, there might be a surge within us. But if we see, the more we see the mechanism of that, the less effect it has on actually coming out as behavior or something that we say. We can just see, well, okay, that's the conditioned reaction, but I know that it's not actually fundamentally true. That I just choose not to believe that thought. We're not trying to make the thought go away, not opposed to the thought arising. The important thing is to see that it's not actually true. It's never the other person. The other person in your whole life, the other person has never hurt you. I'm not talking physically, never hurt you, never made you angry. We do that to ourselves. When we believe the thought that they shouldn't have done that, that wasn't right, we suffer. You see, it's just a conditioned reaction, not to be believed, sort of loses its momentum. Okay, another category of things that can make us suffer is regret. Right? Regret is about the past, of course. Something that might have happened 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago, who knows? But it's not happening now. If it's still causing us to suffer, the only reason it's still causing us to suffer is because we're reloading it into current memory, which we do ourselves, right? And why do we do that? Because we feel like it shouldn't have happened, right? I know what should have happened and that wasn't it. Or I know what I should have done and I did something else and I can never go back and undo it. That's true. But it's also not happening now, except to the extent that we replay it in our mind. So if there's something from the past that still has some juice to us, still causes us to suffer, there are two things we can do, and really only two things. One is to really look at it and see if there's something still to be learned from it, and we can only do that if we're not looking at it judgmentally. We're not looking at it trying to convince that we were really right all along, or that, you know, that whatever our story, we were really terrible people, and we'll never be other than that. Whatever the storyline is, just look at it objectively. Is there anything more that we can learn about our own behavior? We're not talking about anybody else's behavior, just about our own behavior, our own response, our own misunderstanding. Is there any more to be learned there? Maybe, maybe not. If there is, great. If there's not, we're done with it. The other thing that we can do is there anything in this moment, this current moment, that requires our action? You know, I don't know, maybe it's just writing a handwritten note of apology, or maybe it's just in the privacy of our own mind, genuinely, forgiving someone else for their action years ago, or maybe our parents for our upbringing or whatever. Right? So it's important when we're looking at past events to recognize that however we acted or however the other person acted, it can only be to the level of their understanding. We can't reasonably expect that we should have acted at a higher level than our understanding at the time. Right? That would be unreasonable. Right? I mean, the highest standard that we could hold ourselves to is based on, how we understood life and ourselves. And at the time that we have this regretful memory, was I acting in good conscience? Was I doing the best I can? And even if from the perspective of today, looking back, of course we'd do something different. Hopefully we'd do something different. If we said, no, I'd still do the exact same thing again, it just means we didn't really learn much from whatever difficult situation arose. But if we look back with, let's say, a reasonable degree of regret, like, yeah, that was me acting like a jerk. And at the time, I thought I was justified. Now I can see I was mistaken. Good, right? Good. You're not going to undo the circumstance, but I see all of that as just the way we learn. If we don't look back on past actions that we've done with some degree of remorse, either we weren't trying very hard or we haven't learned anything in the meantime. So we can just see, yeah, I can see now, if something similar arises now, of course I would do differently. But we have to be compassionate about what we understood at the time, and not have an expectation that we should have acted above our pay grade at the time. We could just do what we knew how to do with the conditioning that was in place at the time. Okay, so we can also look at expectations, whereas regrets are about the past, expectations are about the future. Things that aren't happening now, but we expect them to. We not only hope that they do, there's a little bit of an element of, no, I really expect that this is going to happen. The other person is going to behave like I expect them to. This is, life pays off just often enough that belief is sort of held in place. I mean, Las Vegas operates by the same principle. The slot machines pay off just enough that we keep believing that that's a real possibility, right? So when we impose our expectations on some future event, it's like we have some skin in the game. It's like we have almost a demand in some ways on life that, we really expect it to turn out this way. And then when it doesn't, we suffer, right? So what, as an example, let's say, just a mild form, you're waiting for friend for meet for dinner somewhere, and you expect them to arrive at 7 o'clock, and they're 20 minutes late. So they, you know, during those 20 minutes, you felt like your expectations were dashed to a certain extent. You know, okay, mild, you're bummed for 20 minutes. Okay, in another example, you might have expected your life partner to remain faithful to you always, and they didn't. Devastated by it. Not saying that's fun or nice, or that you should like it, but I am saying that it has a lot to do with trust, right? Because what we mean by trust is I trusted you to do that and you did something else. But what we really mean by that is we expected you to be like this. And when you broke that vow, I suffered. You hurt me. No, actually, the other person just did what they did. It was our expectation that got dashed. We suffered. I'm not saying that we should like those kinds of situations, but we can also perhaps see that someone else's behavior in many, many ways is a function of everything that's gone before in this lifetime, same as ours. And people make their own decisions out of their own needs or out of their own misunderstandings or out of their own non-caring, and that happens. What's hurtful is when we expect it to the degree that we become devastated when that expectation is crushed. That's an extreme example, but we do this expectation game often. It's almost a demand on life. When it doesn't turn out the way we want it to turn out, we suffer. All right, let's take another example. That's being right. Right. Of course, being right implies that we need somebody else to be wrong. Right. So we enter into this dualism, but our sense of what's right is founded in what we believe. Right. We wouldn't believe something if we thought it was wrong. We believe in our beliefs to be right. I'm right on this one, and it's sort of self-empowering because it feels like, no, I'm really right on this, and there's something like that sense of righteousness to sort of amp up the ego. Right? We have an opposing view, an opposing person, an opposing party, and I know it's right. Right? Why? Because it's my opinion. The sense of righteousness founded on a belief that I know what should be, and I know what shouldn't be, and I'm the one to make that decision. In our own mind, it elevates us to godlike status. I'm the one that can determine right from wrong. When life goes in a direction that we feel is wrong, then we feel like it's not me that made a mistake, it's life, right? I know it's right, and life is life. Maybe got a lot of things right, but not this time. And we suffer. When we oppose life, we will lose. Like every time, we'll suffer. So we can just see that sometimes life doesn't go our way. I mean, we know that mentally, but um, sometimes we act as if we didn't really know that. When I was young, 8 or 9 or so, I remember living in a neighborhood, and there was this chant that we would do if somebody, some other kid from, I don't know, another neighborhood um, said something insulting. Chant this chant of sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. I don't know if you ever did that one, but that was popular in our neighborhood. But there's a certain wisdom to that. Like, yeah, sure, you can physically hurt me, but words, um, words don't land. They're just words. They're just vibrations that come my way. So there's a certain wisdom in that. You know, for 8 or 9 year olds, it was one more movement. The sense of it's not fair. So it's not fair. I mean, fair for who? You know, what may be fair for one person is not fair for someone else. I mean, I've occasionally seen the chickens that we have sort of jump up in the air and catch a butterfly midair and eat it. You know, so from the perspective of the butterfly, it's like, well, that's not fair. Perspective of the chicken is like, hmm, tasty. So we can see that this question of fairness is a personal perspective, but we feel like no, there should be some sort of universal standard that applies to everybody, and things are either fair or they're not fair. You know, there's a standard. There's a, you know, written in the heavens somewhere that things are either fair or not fair. And there's also a sense that they should be fair. I mean, this is clearly a human imposition on reality. We think that things should work that way. You know, if someone is, I don't know, virtuous, they should be rewarded. And if someone is greedy and obnoxious, they should be somehow put down or punished. You know? But, you know, we can look around and see that it doesn't always seem to work that way. And we can rail against life and say, well, that's not fair. But again, when we do that, life doesn't change, but we suffer because we're sort of holding on to this sense of it's not fair, and I know it, and and I can sort of amp up my feelings, you know, so by sort of, you know, screaming to myself internally, it's not fair the way it is. So it may not seem fair to, you know, our human perspective or a personal perspective, um, but we don't, you know, we really don't know the deeper story. I mean, even in the most superficial way, perhaps the virtuous person that had misfortune, maybe there's a little too much pride happening. You know, maybe the greedy person anxious over the possibility of loss of their ill-gotten gains. Who knows? You know, maybe there's some past life spillover. We don't really, you know, and we don't need to. We can just see that life as it is happens, and we can choose how we react to it. If we argue with it, we suffer. Okay, one last category, and that's self-judgment. You know, so far we've been talking about external stimuli, right? Now we're talking about what we do within ourselves, where we play both roles. Actually, you know, we're the defendant and the judge. You know, we're the higher self and the little me. We think that we're playing grown up by, you know, sort of holding the line, holding the standard for ourselves, and pointing the finger at the little me, you know, the guilty one, the unworthy one, that one. But I'm the adult in the room, and I know how that that little me character should be acting, right? Anybody ever feel that? Play that one? How painful that is? But it's just two thoughts, right? One thought playing the higher self, one thought playing the victimized little me, the unworthy one. Just two thoughts. Both believed. We believe that the higher self is justified criticizing this, and the little me feels justified in feeling unworthy, not good enough. Just two opposing thoughts. The only thing that holds it in place is our belief in it. That's it. The thoughts may still arise. I mean, they've got a certain momentum, decades worth of patterned thinking. So they're not going to disappear overnight. But what we can do is see when those kind of thoughts arise that cause us to suffer, to question our beingness, our right to be here. We can just look at that, see if they're really true or not. See the mechanism that holds that pattern in place. It does no good at all to try to forcibly push those thoughts out of existence. They have too much history. They'll come back. They'll come back when we're tired or bummed out about something. So we can't forcibly eject them from our mind. To do that would give them a reality that they don't deserve. They're just conditioned patterns, just neurological conditioned patterns. So what we can see is, yeah, that's how this particular body mind was patterned, but it's just simply not true, not really true. Because what's actually true, deeper level, is that there is this awareness that's aware of all of these mental battles, all of these self-judgments, these self-assessments that convince us that we're worthy, unworthy, belong here or don't, are lovable or not, just patterned beliefs. But from the point of view of awareness, the awareness is actually untouched by any of that. It's just aware of it. It's aware of our, self-enhancing thoughts, and it's aware of our, dismal thoughts about ourselves. On whatever the mind is producing at the moment, the awareness is recognizes it, notices it, and when we are looking from the perspective of awareness and see this mental activity as just conditioned sort of free running of the brain, it takes away its power. We don't have to try to eject the thoughts, just seeing that they're not actually true. There may be some relative truth to it, but not anything of any significance. What is significance is that formless, spacious immensity that we truly are is present for all that. That's what's significant. That's what our essential being is. And when we can look back at the conditioned behavior from that perspective, as often as it takes, for a prolonged period, maybe years, right? When we can do that, it's the stickiness of that conditioned behavior just begins to drop away gradually. We don't have to try to make it do it. We just see it, be willing to see it. When we're unwilling to investigate our suffering, it perpetuates, right? Because we haven't gotten to the cause of it. And we suspect a cause, know how it causes us to suffer, and refuse to look at it, it perpetuates our suffering. So the question is, do we deal with it once for all, or do we let it haunt us for the rest of our life? It's like going to the dentist. You have a toothache. You can go to the dentist, get it fixed. Not fun, but it's done and over with in a relatively short time. Or you can go day after day with this ever-present possibility of pain forever, right? Until we're willing to look. So going back to Nisargadatta's quote, the indifference to our own suffering is what perpetuates it. The indifference to our own suffering. So it's really our willingness to look at what we suspect is there, look at it is that causes us to suffer, and to see the suffering not as the enemy. The suffering is actually the pointer. The suffering is actually in service to us when we really see it. Because it's revealing something that we're believing that's not quite true. And that belief is causing us to suffer. It's like when you stub your toe hurts. That's actually a good thing. If you didn't feel it, you might go on damaging your foot forever. But the fact that we feel that pain draws our attention to it, like, oh, there's an issue here, I need to pay attention. And psychological suffering is the same way. It's always a pointer. It's always a pointer towards something that I am believing. It's not a pointer to how the other person should be different. It's always a pointer back to ourselves. What am I believing that's causing me to suffer in this situation or in this moment? So we can see when we look at it that way, the suffering is actually our friend in this journey. Without the suffering, I would be bothered to look. The point is not just to take some drug to make the suffering go away. The point is really to see the underlying cause that the suffering is pointing to, and to use that as an opportunity. Really see what beliefs are holding that pattern in place. And there's always a belief underneath there. We might think, no, it's just a feeling. There's a belief holding it in there. So that's really the opportunity. And that's actually the good news. The good news is that this suffering that many of us feel in this lifetime is resolvable. We're not condemned to suffering our entire life. Like I said at the beginning, we may feel physical pain. Sure, that's part of this life, part of this body. But suffering is optional. It may take some work to really see the truth in that, but that there is an exit. There is a way through the suffering, but it's through the suffering, not around it and not ignoring it. It's really being willing to see without judgment, to remain present for that mechanism, to see how those belief thoughts play out, and pay attention